So welcome back into our OSPF version 3 lab. We've just configured the West router, and now we're going to move on and configure the Sacramento and Phoenix routers underneath the West section of the network. So let's right-click Sacramento and open up a console to that guy there. And we'll configure this guy from the console. And we'll do IPv6 router OSPF and the OSPF process ID, which is 42. Again, just like with IP version 2, the process IDs don't have to match, but it makes for easier scripting and easier troubleshooting if it does. So when we hit enter here, it immediately comes back and tells us OSPF version 3 process 42 couldn't pick a router ID, please configure manually. OSPF version 3 takes the same procedure for picking a router ID as OSPF version 2 does. It picks the highest number IPv4 address on the router. Since this router doesn't have any IPv4 addresses, OSPF can't pick one. Now, I personally am kind of glad that OSPF tells you this because EIGRP doesn't bother to tell you this, and the only way you find out about it is when you completely configure EIGRP on everything, then wonder why aren't my neighbor adjacencies forming? You go into a router and do show IPv6 EIGRP neighbor, and it comes back and tells you, hey, I couldn't pick a router ID, so I'm not going to form any neighbor adjacencies. So I guess it's just something you have to know. Luckily, OSPF version 3 tells you. So we'll give it a router ID of 4.4.4.4, and that's all we have to specify there. So now OSPF is completely configured. Now we can go onto our serial interfaces and our loopback interfaces and enable it on those interfaces. So we can do interface serial 0/0 IPv6 OSPF. We give it the process ID of 42 and say it's in area 10. And just about immediately, we have a neighbor adjacency formed between Sacramento and West. We see that it's the West because it's got the little icon that tells us it's changed. We look over here, and it says, hey, it's gone from loading to full, loading is done. So let's go over here to Sacramento and do interface loopback 1, the same command there, loopback 2, the same command there, and loopback 3, the same command there. So now that we've done that, let's go back up to West and let's look at our database up here. Before, we only had one advertising router, which was 2222 in area 10. Now we should have 4444 as well. And there we go. It's advertising 4444 in area 10. We also have more prefixes being advertised. In this case, we go up here to area 0 and look at the inter-area link prefix states. And there are the 01 and the 02, which are the actual IPv6 addresses for these serial links between Sacramento and Phoenix and West. Even though Phoenix isn't configured yet, it's still being advertised from the West router. As well as the 20, 21, and 22 networks that is on the loopback interfaces on the Sacramento router. We can also run the command show IPv6 route on the West router. And we see that we have more OSPF routes being learned to these 20, 21, and 22 networks as well. So I'm going to show you something neat that I discovered when setting up this lab. Let's go into the Phoenix router and open the console to this guy and go into config mode. And let's say that we go directly to the interface configuration and completely forget about setting up the OSPF process ID. Do you think it'll work? Well, let's find out. So let's go to interface serial 0/0. We'll do IPv6 OSPF 42 area 10. And look there, it actually says, hey, OSPF version 3 process 42 couldn't pick a router ID, please configure manually. Just as if we had set up the OSPF process ID first. So in short, it will create the process ID for you if you forget to set it up. So if you actually have an IPv4 address on this router, you don't have to go manually specify the IPv6 OSPF process ID manually. However, before the neighbor adjacency will form, we will still have to go specify the router ID. So let's configure the other 3 loopback interfaces here, and then we'll go specify that router ID, and the adjacency should form immediately. So we'll do interface loopback 1, run the same command there, loopback, 2, run the same command there, and then loopback 3, you notice we get that command every time we enter OSPF42. It's just reminding us, hey, I can't pick a router ID. Fine. IPv6 router OSPF42 router ID 5.5.5.5. As soon as we do that, the adjacency forms between Phoenix and West. We look over here on West, we should now see all of the networks behind the Phoenix router on the West router, which are the 30, 31, and 32 networks. So if we do show IPv6 route, there are the 30, 31, and 32 networks behind the West router. So in the next video, we will configure the last 3 routers in our topology. We'll do it a lot quicker than these 3. I'll use my cut and paste method to configure those so that you don't have to sit and watch me type all these commands all the time. And we'll pick that up in the next video.